Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. There's a multiplicity of options here. It's an embarrassment of UFO and alternative science. Rich is here, so we appreciate you coming today. I'm Paul Hynek, and I'm kind of a fanboy of Andrew Gallimore here. I sort of engineered the presentation here today because he's a real-life hero of mine with his academic investigations into psychedelics. He is, as he says, a psychedelic speculator, which I think is just one of the most mellifluous phrases I've ever heard. Now, sure, aliens and UFOs are super interesting, but I want to show you a few slides of what I think the connected,
unfortunately,
which I think is where we really find gold in them dar hills. Okay. So, I always like to update my presentations, and so Andrew is a very curious fellow. This is from today. This is him doing a light experience done by our friend Ray Willis, who may or may not be here. What was this?
big differences in the kind of beings and how you might access different kinds of beings. I mean, this is a whole new world entering here. Kind of say to me, oh, this is like DMT without having to take DMT, but it wasn't. So it wasn't like DMT. So and if anybody tells you that you can experience DMT without taking DMT, I would be highly skeptical. But some of the flow of the state, the way that it changes over time, is like DMT state, but there's no substitute for DMT, I would say.
Here's how these worlds collide. So first, let me start off with a preface. Many of you have had
that you can't
science would call supernatural.
Will be providing DVDs for.
How many of you have had an
Any speaker that you weren't
life
able to see and
later
see, you can buy that DVD before leaving today.
completely
Also, we've had a change of schedule. Unfortunately,
DMT?
Mr. Redfield,
You kind of felt that it might sort of transcend that artificial.
will update you if that's the case. So today, quite luckily, we have an intriguing conversation regarding non-human intelligence.
Particular bridge I'd like to establish.
Hynek, Dr. Gallimore,
My Nova Spivak.
Dr. Gallimore
Oh,
is a computational neurobiologist, pharmacologist, chemist, a writer. He has a deep interest in psychedelics.
book, the United States Air Force.
He's done a lot of work into the field and
The first.
highly appreciative of his intellect and the avenue that he's opened.
The weight of the
And understand
suggests
intelligence.
phenomena is real in some of its elements. Where they come from, that's a much more difficult question for a scientist to answer. But he and Jacques Vallée and others felt that extraterrestrial hypothesis didn't seem to encompass all of the aspects of the,
A consultant
which is something a lot of us here feel. There are elements beyond the
entertained
visiting of a craft, communication, etc., that don't seem to be solely represented by extraterrestrial visitation. Okay, so where does that leave us? So my father and Jacques Vallée and others lean to the potential interdimensional hypothesis. So I said, that's what I told Nova. He said, well, you should read a book called Alien Information Theory. I think somebody said, what? That's right. Alien Information Theory. About the coolest book title ever, right? So I said, well, yeah, I'll read it. I'm already on board. Well, what's it about? And he said, it's about DMT. I said, okay, yeah, I don't know what that is. It's like 4 or 5 years ago. And he said, DMT is the most powerful psychedelic known on Earth. That's right, yeah. And one of its variants is ayahuasca. So it's better known younger sister. I said, okay, look, I may or may not have done lots of psychedelics. I may or may not have had long hair. That sounds pretty interesting. I don't quite get. He said, well, in the book, the author, Andrew Gallimore, posits the potential there, the possibility that it's not an hallucinogenic when you take DMT, but rather that it's a filter for you to perceive an ever-present other reality, a hyper reality, and that this is a gateway for you to escape the grid, to this cosmic game, for this transcendent voyage to see what the universe is really like. So he describes it sort of, and all of us fumble for words to describe these phenomena, as like another dimension. So, so you're saying that on command you can take this substance and at least feel like you're going to another dimension. My father thought UFOs might come from another dimension. This seems like maybe what the approach I can do, because I can't summon CE5s worth crap. Maybe I can do this and go to that dimension and just ask them there. How about that? So then a couple hours later, met another guy for the first time, and I'm asked, well, part of the things I do is I facilitate collide. So experiences, preface. DMT. Many of you have had experiences. Can I hijack the conversation and talk about this?
DVDs for
Universe wants. I have some. You want to do something? Many of you have had an experience.
any speaker that you weren't
Life.
able to see and
Later,
you can buy that DVD before leaving today.
lead
Also, we've had a change of schedule. Unfortunately,
DMT.
Mr. Redfield
You kind of felt that it might sort of transcend that artificial.
will update you if that's
There's
the
a
case. So today, quite luckily, we have a
come from.
station regarding
Office,
non-human intelligence.
particular bridge established.
Hynek, Dr.
Of a Spivak.
Gallimore is computational
of the UFO phenomenon, which was prevalent in the old days, that it was an extraterrestrial investigation of Mother Earth from outside this planet, directed and elusive, but still sort of a purposeful investigation. The ET, the
Phenomena is real. Real in some of its elements. Where they come from, that's a much more difficult question for a scientist to answer. But he and Jacques Vallée and others felt that extraterrestrial
that any culture
encompass all.
to interpret any new phenomenon in
There are elements beyond
technology. Had this all occurred in
that don't seem to be
middle
solely.
given a totally different interpretation,
Okay, so where does that leave us? Interdimensional hypothesis.
which it wasn't at that time. We've entered the space age.
So
It is very logical for
read a book.
phenomena of this sort to be interpreted in the
Theory.
advanced technology.
What? That's right.
It's also complicated by the fact
Ever.
he has arrived at the point
Well, yeah, I'll read it. I'm.
stars
What's it about? He said it's about DMT.
that there are
That is. It's like,
intelligences in the universe. But there, I think we have to follow Arthur C. Clarke in pointing out that we take perhaps a much too narrow view of what intelligence in the universe may be. We live on a water planet. It's very logical, therefore, that our bodies are mostly water. It could be that our consciousness expresses itself through protoplasm and through our particular chemistry. There are bits of information today indicating that, now, for instance, George Wald at Harvard feels that consciousness is the most important factor, and that consciousness can exist in many forms. We are one of those forms. So, as somebody said, the whole question of this trying to communicate with life elsewhere is like the not yet born talking to the long since dead, because it takes so long for anything to get. Furthermore, an advanced civilization might regard radio as we regard jungle drums or smoke signals. They may long since have passed the radio stage of communication. But still, I think it's important that the SETI program continue, because it's an adventure and should be done. And it would be philosophically important to find out that there is some intelligence elsewhere. So, all that my own philosophical feeling about the UFO phenomenon is that when all is said and done, it represents some form of intelligence. But whether that intelligence is from great distances away, or whether it is perhaps much closer to us in a parallel reality or in another dimension, or whether it is in some strange way a product of our own intelligence, our own psyche, I don't know. This is the research problem. That it seems to be programmed, that it seems to have an intelligence of its own, I think is unmistakable. If anyone who studies the subject just sees that. But we must not jump to the conclusion that because it has an intelligence of its own, it is necessarily visitors from outer space. It may be in some strange way connected with that intelligence, if that intelligence can in some way project itself down here. But, well, that's really all I have to say. That's it.
Good, thank you.
Not so bad.
Har dere noen tilleggsspørsmål til det der?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We live on a water planet. So I like that. I like that encapsulation. And part of that is that accepting a phenomena and being comfortable to not have an explanation. Right? That's an awkward intellectual resting point for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people don't lean into UFOs and machine elves and ghosts more because they see, okay, there's some evidence, but I don't know where they come from, so I'm just going to ignore it. And that's very limiting. So my father felt that you have to be open to the existence of a new phenomena, as inconvenient or maybe it runs against your grant, but that once you accept that phenomena, don't be too quick to shove the best available answer into it. Okay? So I was sold on the book. I read Andrew's book. I highly recommend this book. It is an academic roller coaster ride into this incredible world. And I'm going to ask him to summarize the book a bit, and then we'll go into more details about it. But I was fascinated. And I also read The Spirit Molecule by Andrew's colleague, Rick Strassman. And what I found in there was a lot of case histories that sort of echoed the early days of ufology with patterns. I thought that's fascinating to me. And that's one of the other things that sort of made that land bridge to me between UFOs and DMT. DMT is the most intense fire hose experience I've ever had. And almost everybody who's done it fumbles to try to describe it because it's just so intense. And so I started looking online. I said, well, what have people written about? You know, because again, my interest, and I'll mention this briefly, I want to help people demonstrate the objective reality of their encounters, however they classify them, ghosts, DMT, aliens, whatever, because I'd like to move experiencers closer to science. So I started looking online for things. And there are these things. Now, some of these didn't really pan out. They were just kind of interesting, kind of clickbait. But still, that idea really resonated with me, that if my father and Jacques Vallée and others think that UFOs may have some interdimensional aspect, and DMT is kind of a ticket to what seems to be another dimension, let me go that way. Because people haven't yet proven to the satisfaction of the modern scientific world with purely UFO investigations that it's real. So, I feel like I'm in a DMT trip. Okay. So, here's the question. Are these all separate things? I asked about how we classify things. I think a lot of us feel that there may be some type of implicit connective tissue between what we sort of conveniently silo in different categories. So, boy, I put these in there a whole lot? Okay. There we go. So I took one for the team and did DMT. Purely in the interest of science, emboldened by the work of Dr. Gallimore. And I was transported, rocket fuel, fire hose, everything you can think of, into this world that just seemed so much more real than here. And I actually asked, I blurted out, are you what we perceive to be aliens and UFOs? Just ask them, right? And the question I got back through, I don't know how many miles of synapses and neurons, because it wasn't really embodied. I didn't see machine elves, I didn't see scorpions, etc. I just felt this intelligence. It was mostly feminine. And they said, we can't explain in a way that you would understand. And it wasn't like a condescending or pat answer. And I started thinking about it, and I said, well, if UFOs and DMT and other things are related, I can see how that link would be beyond my ability to understand. That rings true. But that really made me feel like this has potential, let's do it more. So again, in the interest of science, I've been doing it more. And I find it to be a fascinating avenue. And there are people here I've talked to that have done DMT as well and have fascinating experiences, and it kind of resonates with them that this is a hyper-real situation that's not on its own and has connections to other things that we perceive. I have one idea is that, okay, is there like an underlying base consciousness that, for whatever reason, might instantiate itself in different ways in different situations? Is it all essentially the same thing? For me doing DMT, hard to imagine there's anything else out there more base level than that. Or is it appearing in a kind of uniform way, and it's our own perceptive biases that perceive it in radically different ways, or both? So that's just how it feels to me, just so friggin' trippy. But what I'm interested in is, how do we prove the objective reality of aliens? And then sort of a side question to that is, are they telling us the truth? Has anybody here had an experience with some type of superintelligence, let's not classify it, and had the feeling that they were not honest? That's kind of unsettling to think about, isn't it? Okay. Never gets old. So, close encounters, okay, my father's classification system. I'm interested in verifiable evidence. And close encounter speaks to the type of encounter that happened. Was it a ship? Did you see it? Was there, physical evidence? Did you see a being? I'm interested in adding a new element to that of how compelling was it? How many witnesses? Okay? So I've come up with a scale, I'm not going to belabor this, of verifiable evidence. And what I want to do is inculcate this into various experiencer communities for people who are interested in demonstrating objective reality of their encounters. Not everybody cares about that. But for those who do, I want to provide a proactive tool set. Because what we've taken to science so far hasn't worked. More than half of Americans believe in UFOs. A lot of scientists don't. Those are folks I want to reach. I don't give a rat's ass about the government. They can come along if they want, but they're not driving the train. So one of the categories, I'll just talk about briefly, is math. That's a universal language. And the gold standard for that is, if you can solve an unsolved math problem, you'll have the interest of Michael Shermer, Seth Shostak, other respected scientists. Whatever message we bring back, hey, they tell us to stop with the nukes, it's not working. But if we have a classification system and you solve one of these math problems, they're not going to say, okay, you proved aliens. They're going to say, you proved supernatural intelligence. Now I want to learn more about it. And that's where I think we can really push the needle forward on the conversation and find more information. Okay? So, that's the preface of how we came about being here today. Because I respect Andrew and his work so much, and he has, more than anybody else, and now he's working on a book about the history of DMT. His first book is Alien Information Theory. The next book that's out recently, late last year, is Reality Switch Technologies. almost as good a title as alien information theory. And he's now working on sort of a history, a compendium of psychedelics. So he's really mapped out the topography. So for me, with my yearning interest to explore, is there a link between what feels to be hyper-real in DMT and aliens? There's nobody better in the world who's already applied academic rigor to that. So that's how today we have UFOs and DMT together. And I want to start off, Andrew, are DMT machine elves aliens? Let's just cut right to the chase.
Well, let's not cut right to the chase. Maybe I should. So I did just fly. Well, first of all, thank you for coming to watch us have our little discussion here. I flew in from Tokyo yesterday, so I'm not 100%. If I'm not 100% coherent, then please do forgive me. But I will do my best to remain reasonably cogent, so to speak. So I should also thank Paul. He gave a very flattering introduction to me. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that I didn't know who Paul was. So he dropped me this email, and I was like, oh God, who the hell is this? Bothering me on a Sunday morning, you know. But you know, we had dinner last night, and I think we're going to be good friends. I think we got on very well. So I needn't have been concerned. So first of all, I should say I agree with everything that your father said, by the way. I think our conception of what we mean by aliens and what we mean by alien intelligence has been somewhat limited. Now, myself, this is the first time I've spoken at a dedicated, do we still call it ufology? Probably not anymore, right? Okay, that's...
I mean, we've gone from UFOs to UAP, but ufology remains intact.
Okay, so I wasn't that cognizant of modern ufology until quite recently, and I've been very pleasantly surprised, actually, about hearing more and more. I assumed wrongly that the vast majority, or pretty much all of ufologist types, were assuming that we were talking about physical beings arriving in shimmering metallic discs, whereas it seems that everyone is much more open to the idea that this is something far, far stranger that we're dealing with here. So I think your father encapsulated that perfectly. Yeah, so DMT. I guess we should get to DMT. DMT is, in my opinion, Terence McKenna used to say that DMT is the most bizarre experience that a human could experience this side of the yawning grave, right? And I would agree with that. It is a remarkably astonishing, choose your word, choose your superlative. It is mind-blowing. Terence McKenna also used to say the only danger with DMT is death by astonishment.
What a way to go.
It is physiologically benign. The body and the brain is very comfortable in the presence of DMT, but your own consciousness might not be initially. It is shattering. It uproots all of your fundamental ontological assumptions that we all carry. Those assumptions about what is real, what is not real, what is possible, and what is impossible. Those are all shattered. They are obliterated within 30 seconds of consuming DMT. And there is really no way back from that. My first experience with DMT. Now, I've been interested in DMT since I was a teenager. I first learned about Terence McKenna at the dawn of the internet, so the mid-1990s. was when I first heard about DMT. It was probably almost a decade later that I actually first took DMT. So I was listening to the Terence McKenna lectures. I was reading the books about DMT. I thought I was as prepared as anyone could be. You know, I'd heard the stories of the machine elves and the singing impossible objects and seven-dimensional Fabergé eggs and things like this, and the visible language experience. So I thought I was ready. Was I? Fuck. My first experience, oh God, my first experience wasn't even a breakthrough experience. I had procured some DMT, finally, and I failed a few times trying to smoke. I didn't know what I was doing, trying to smoke it, and I was burning it and just inhaling this, carbon, basically. But finally, the last attempt, just before I kind of gave up and went to bed and thought, okay, I'll save this for another day, I managed to get it right. I managed to get a lungful of this curious-tasting vapor, like burning plastic, into my lungs. And about halfway through the inhalation, something started happening. I got this sound, this ping. It's hard to explain. It's a sound, cross between a sound and a feeling, a sense that, yes, this was happening. So I laid down on my bed, on my back, and I was appalled. I was horrified.
Did it offend your delicate Victorian sensibilities?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. It offended all of my delicate and indelicate senses. I was confronted. DMT is not about meeting or seeking, in my opinion. It's about being confronted by an intelligence of such immensity and undeniability that it shocked me. John Mack, who you'll be all familiar with, invented this term, which has become widely used, ontological shock. The sudden realization that everything you thought you knew was wrong. And not just wrong, not even wrong, profoundly wrong. That there was this intelligence. Now, we can talk about the forms that these entities that people experience might take until the cows come home. But for me, the form isn't as important. What is important and undeniable is this, and I know you experienced this as well, Paul, is this profoundly intense and immense intelligence that you are confronted with. Even though it was not a breakthrough experience for me, there was no denying the fact that I was entering a space that had been constructed by an intelligence that I still cannot comprehend. We're not just talking about an intelligence that is, slightly more advanced than us, or, 1,000 years more advanced than us, or something like that. We are talking about an intelligence that is so immense, that is so powerful, that is so far beyond our own limited cognitive sophistication, that we can't begin to get our head around it. And I was shaken to my very bones, to my very soul by that first experience, even though it wasn't a breakthrough experience. And when I finally came back, finally started to recognize again that I was a human. I lost that. That went. I forgot any concept of what being a human meant. That was gone as well. I was just in this space with this vast intelligence, when I finally came back and remembered what I had done, that I had taken this drug, as it's called, this technology, I would prefer to call it, this molecular technology, all I could say was, excuse my language, oh my fucking God. Oh my fucking God. And I said that, that's all I could say. I said that for like 10 minutes. I turned
Never the articulate professor.
Ever the articulate professor, exactly. And I was, then I straight to messaging my friends, and I was euphoric. I was shattered. I was shocked.
How long was this breakthrough after the first time that you did it?
Sorry, how long was?
This breakthrough experience after the first time you had done it.
So my first breakthrough experience was later on. That would have been, maybe a few months. I didn't go back to it after that first experience for a while. This is something that requires time to get your head around, and you go back when you realize that you can't get your head around it, and then it all kind of goes away in a sense. You lose. Terence McKenna also. Sorry to keep quoting Terence McKenna, but he's very important. It's like, in a way, it's similar to the dream state in that you come out of it ranting and raving and just like, oh my God, what just happened to me, and then it starts to fade, and you kind of almost forget what it was that so shocked you and so made you, was so appalling about this experience and horrifying, So that takes some time.
Can I add?
Yeah,
that?
of course.
So I had an experience not too long ago, 3 or 4 months ago, something called Changa, and it felt like heaven to me, not sort of a blissful place, but infinitely stimulating. And I said, I could see this exact vantage point forever and never tire of it. And then the next feeling I had was, I can never just go back to being a human. I don't understand what that means anymore. And it wasn't so much yearning to stay as I have at other times. It was just the cold, hard realization, well, that's it. I'm here to stay. My mind will never work. 20 minutes later, I'm checking Waze for traffic on the 405. The shards of my ego had reassembled, and I was back. I couldn't believe the rapidity with which it, I won't say faded, but sort of left me intact.
Yeah, this is kind of what's also quite remarkable about DMT, is that it is as I said, it's physiologically benign. It gets into the brain. It causes the most dramatic restructuring of your experience.
Is it in the brain already in the pineal gland?
Okay. Oh. So it is present in the brain in very, very small amounts. But there's been a lot of speculation that goes back to a biochemist called James Callaway back in the 1980s, who proposed that perhaps DMT was causing dreams. And Rick Strassman, of course, suggested in his book, The Spirit Molecule, which you mentioned, that DMT might be released by the pineal gland and be kind of the conduit for the release of the soul at the point of death. Now, he's straying into highly metaphysical territory there. But in terms of what we understand about the endogenous DMT, is that it's present in very small concentrations that don't seem to be, it's never been shown to be present in concentrations that would make it psychoactive, so to speak. It's off.
I fiddled with the microphone. You remind me of my father. My father was, to many people, a sympathetic figure. An astrophysicist, a rocket scientist who said flying saucer is a bunch of hokum, and over the course of 20 years came not to believe, because scientists don't traffic with the word belief so much, but came to accept the weight of the data. And he made it acceptable for a lot of people with the movie Close Encounters to say, yes, I've seen something. Here's this professor who's nuts and bolts astrophysicist says there's something to it. Okay, maybe I can, open my eyes a bit more to it. And he applied a scientific rigor to the study of it. That's what you are doing. Exactly the same thing here with this new frontier. You are a brilliant neuroscientist, PhD, who's not just saying, well, DMT is friggin' cool, but in your book, you lay out in sort of lay comprehensibility how it affects the brain, how you believe it's a conduit to this other reality. You are, I think, a sympathetic figure like my father, and you can help people sort of walk away from the stigma, because this is a psychedelic drug, right? So a lot of people are just going to say, no, but it's qualitatively different than any other drug. And one way I'll demonstrate that is I have done a fair amount of psychedelics. And one time, maybe the third or fourth time I did DMT, I didn't have that breakthrough, but I felt more like an ayahuasca internal cleansing, and it was helping me. And like it had done before, I feel this emotional cleansing. And it said to me, welcome back, Paul. Let's pick up where we left off last time. So not only was that caring, I thought I was immensely flattered, but unlike any other experience I had had before, it's this steady state intelligence that's just there. It's not like a new feeling of connection with the landscape when I take mushrooms. It's something that's there, and it feels hyper real. So with your book, with alien information theory and the writings that you've done around it, and now reality search technologies, you help people who are, say, DMT curious look at it in a new light, and you walk them through not only how this affects the brain, but then you position it in this elegantly layered worldview that once you get along for the ride and you say, wow, okay, this DMT stuff may be really real, the context that you place it in is even more overwhelming. Could you speak a little bit, Andrew, to, you go from like submolecular, can you talk about how you place, now that you've established that it could well be real, here's the effects on the brain, what is this shit?
What is this shit? Yeah. Well, I mean, so first of all, DMT is not, or the effects of DMT are not easy to explain. Trust me on this, right? Most people who've never taken DMT will say it's just a hallucination, right? You're just hallucinating, and that's the end of the story. The only surefire convincer is a small glass pipe and about 15 minutes of your time, right? Like seriously, that's the only way that you can convince somebody that what you're dealing with is not just a hallucination.
And we happen to have a small glass pipe right here. We got more than 15 minutes, so we're good.
But not just from the experiential perspective. So I can convince you that it is not just a hallucination by giving, well, I'm not going to give you DMT, but if you were able to procure some, and that I can guarantee that will convince you that there's a lot more to it than hallucination. But even from a neuroscientific perspective, now I go into some pretty wild realms with my writings. I tread where other scientists fear to tread, so to speak. But I always say that I try to keep at least, part of one foot firmly in neuroscientific territory. I try to maintain some kind of neurological, pharmacological foundation for everything that I'm talking about. If you don't do that, then, well, anything goes. I'm not that satisfied or convinced when people say to me, well, you're going to this place, this is the astral plane, or this is the spirit world, or this is where you go when you die. These things might be true in some way, but it's not a good way to convince somebody, because I don't know how that works. I don't understand the mechanism. I don't understand the levels of the astral plane. That's not my thing. I'm a neuroscientist, so I always try to keep to kind of stay in my lane to some extent and view DMT from my perspective. But I was saying, DMT is not easy to explain. It is not easy to explain why, in the presence of this simple plant alkaloid, your brain suddenly and with ferocious efficiency begins constructing a bizarre, inordinately complex, hyperdimensional reality filled with apparently hyper-intelligent beings. That is not easy to explain. Your brain, I'm a scientist. I believe in evolution. I believe we evolved. Our brains evolved too. And the model of the world that your brain is constructing, your brain evolved to do that. The world you experience now is this model that is being constructed by your brain. I will talk about this in my lecture and workshop and intensive in a lot of detail. But your world is always the model. Some people describe reality as being like a form of controlled hallucination. I don't really like to think of it like that, but certainly your brain is constructing this model of reality. This is the world that you are immersed within. Your brain is a world-building machine, and it is constructing your world all the time. It is using a small trickle, really, of sensory information to kind of modulate and constrain that model. But the world that you experience is always this model. And your brain's ability to construct this functional and adaptive and useful model of the environment is something that it evolved to do over evolutionary epochs. And throughout your life, your development, from the moment you emerged bloodied and screaming from your mother's womb, your brain was learning to construct a world. And as far as we understand, your brain only ever learned to construct one type of world. This normal waking world, the world of everyday life, the functional model of the environment. So here is the problem. When you inhale 2 or 3 lungfuls of DMT, your brain suddenly becomes capable of constructing this alternate world, this other world that it should not know how to construct. It's like, I always say it's like imagine a 5-year-old British child who only speaks English, suddenly one morning flipping and speaking fluent Siberian Yupik. It would be confounding. It's like, where the hell did he learn to speak that? He's never been exposed to this language. He certainly isn't even aware of the existence of this language. It's a far more complex language. How did he learn to speak it?
The image that occurs to me is also in The Matrix, where they plug something in and now I know Kung Fu.
There you go. There you go. So that's what's going on here. Your brain is constructing, and that is what's happened. The model is changing. Your brain is constructing a different model of reality. Whatever the nature of the DMT world, whether we are indeed interfacing with some other dimension, some other universe, some other realm of some sort, in order for us to experience it, your brain must be able to construct a model of it. Some people think that that's a little bit materialistic in a way, but it's not. It's not. We know this. We know, I can remove a certain part of your brain and make your world become black and white, monochrome. We can remove the important part of the brain that's important for representing color information in the world. Some people, there's a very rare condition called achinotopsia, where the part of the brain that is responsible for movement information is damaged, normally by a stroke. And these people, now I can't imagine what this is like, but these people don't see a moving world. They see a world as a series of still images, which is hard to imagine what that's like. So the movement information is also something that's being constantly constructed by the brain. If you damage this part of the brain that's important at the back of the brain for color information, you get a condition called achromatopsia, where, as I said, the world becomes monochrome. So we know that the informational structure, the content and the dynamics of your world is something that your brain is constantly constructing. That doesn't speak to the reality of it. All experiences are in a way real, in that they're all made from the same stuff, I always say. They're all made from this unified pattern of neural information that your brain is generating. So when you take DMT, what is happening is that this model of the world is changing. Your brain suddenly, for reasons that we cannot explain easily, in my opinion, and that's why I've spent the last 2 decades thinking and writing and speaking about DMT, is because it is not easy to explain as a hallucination. You're not seeing your dead grandmother. You're seeing beings that bear no relationship whatsoever. These worlds bear no relationship whatsoever. Nothing is taken from this world and brought into the DMT world. It is completely distinct. It is a disjoint reality. And that's hard for anyone who hasn't taken DMT to understand what that even means, right?
And then you get even trippier, dude, because it's almost like you view this world as the Truman Show. And that DMT is this, in the cosmic game, allows you to understand that we're in this Truman Show bubble and to help you transcend that.
Yes, precisely. People always say there's a number of characteristic features of the DMT state. Now, it's varied. It seems to be a vast and highly complex structure. But people describe this sense that this space has more dimensions than our slice of reality, our 3+1. Dimensional world, right?
Calling time the +1 for...
Time is the +1, yeah? Yeah, we got some physicists in the room. That's a nod to you, nod to the physicists, yes. This three spatial +1 of time, right? When people enter the DMT space, they describe seeing all sides of objects at once. They describe objects that are not just complicated or complex, but that are impossible. Objects that cannot exist in this 3-dimensional world. That is also what's so astonishing about the DMT experiences.
Yeah, another way is like, are you familiar with Flatland? You know, the work that people live in 2 dimensions and they can't understand what a 3rd dimension would be like. To me, this is like somebody in Flatland with 2 dimensions being confronted with 8 billion dimensions and trying to make sense of that. I don't know if anybody wants to do a show of hands, people taking DMT, but I don't know of anybody who's taken that who says, oh, yeah, I understood it. Yeah, it was pretty cool, right? It's just not a common refrain.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is why I think we have to accept, and again, it bears repeating. This is why it's so kind of appalling in many ways and horrifying, because there is this realization that the reality that we exist within is a thin slice of a much larger, much more complex, high-dimensional structure. And DMT seems to grant access to that. It allows information to reach your nervous system that is normally inaccessible. And so you become part of, your brain effectively becomes a high-dimensional processor for a few minutes. You enter, you become part of, you become the alien, in a sense. You become part of this higher dimensional, this impossible reality, this reality that literally cannot exist in this 3-dimensional world, in the same way that a cube cannot exist in the flatland world. It can be conceptualized. Mathematicians will talk about 6-dimensional space. It's not difficult to do mathematics in if you're good at mathematics.
And Eric Weinstein talks about 6 dimensions of time itself.
Well, there we go, you see. So, yeah, add
That'll
plus
freak your
6.
shit out.
Yes, plus 6. So it's, yeah, so this is why I think, this is how I developed the book, Alien Information Theory, is trying to map out a coherent narrative. This, I don't claim that this is the revealed truth. It's just a kind of vision of reality.
It is internally consistent, and it is a coherent viewpoint on this from somebody very well educated to make this. You know, we've seen a lot of shifting in the public landscape. First about cannabis with CBD, much more acceptance, and also a resurgence in clinical prestige for psychedelics. Right? There are ketamine clinics, a lot of research studies with psilocybin and ecstasy and others that show antidepressant effects. Have you, in your decades of involvement with DMT, and maybe it's hard because you might be the frog in the water, it's getting warmer slowly, but have you seen sort of a difference in the attitudes of people, especially in the academic community, towards DMT in particular?
Oh, absolutely, yes. There's been nothing short of a revolution, I think. This is, so, you know, the first psychedelic revolution in the 1960s, and when things kind of, in a way, went wrong, I think, it all happened so fast and so quickly. I mean, I really wasn't alive in the 1960s, so I wasn't there to experience that. I'm not sure if you were, Paul.
Wow.
But
Well, I can tell you that in it wasn't the 60s, but 1972, I'm 10 years old, I put 6 hits of acid in a ho-ho and saw Jethro Tull. So if I ruined psychedelic back then, I'm sorry.
yes, so Paul is responsible for that. Yes, but fortunately now, so, you know, we went through this dark age from really the beginning of the 70s up until the early 90s. So Rick Strassman, his significance here cannot be overstated. So, you know, Rick has become a friend of mine, and we work together on a paper which maybe we'll talk about a little bit later. But Rick Strassman really blazed the trail for psychedelic research in that he jumped through the hoops, and there were many hoops, believe me, that he had to jump through to get permission to be injecting people with DMT. What he didn't say is, oh, I want to study this remarkable state of consciousness and communicate with aliens, which I would have done, and I wouldn't have got the funding or the permission. You know, Rick was Rick was a little bit more conservative, and he said, oh, I want to study the effects of DMT on people's blood pressure, on their heart rate. Really, really boring, fucking boring shit, right? That nobody cares about. But that's how you get funding, is you tell them the most boring story about what measurements you're going to take, blood pressure and, you know, skin temperature and things like this that have no one's ever. I don't even know what the results were of that. I don't even know if Rick can tell you. But what came out of it as a byproduct, what of course was the initial aim, you know, was these remarkable trip reports that, you know, he had about 60 volunteers, each with a number of injections of DMT. So just an incredible, the first, certainly the largest study of DMT in humans that has ever been done. And, you know, he built that from the ground up. It took him many years. You know, the paperwork you can just imagine, and having to back and forth with the DEA and the FDA and the other acronyms of American pharmaceutical and regulatory bureaucracy. That was no small feat. And since then, certainly there's been an explosion, I would say, of interest in psychedelics. Not just the phenomenological aspect, so, you know, what are the experiences like, but also, as you mentioned, Paul, the clinical aspects. You know, I think we are going to see a revolutionary transformation in psychiatry in coming years, and we're already seeing that start to emerge now, with people arriving with intractable treatment-resistant depression, that they've been on several medications for years and are being told, you have to take these drugs for the rest of your life, or until you kill yourself. This is basically where we're at with some people. This is not a joke.
When you come cowboying in and calling this stuff technology, maybe it's plant medicine in that context, right?
Yeah, so people, it depends on your perspective. I refer to it as a technology because it doesn't, the word drug just doesn't cut it. It doesn't always feel like medicine either. It feels like a technology, and the realm that you are entering seems to be this hyper-technological domain that you are entering. You're not entering a world of spirits and spirit guides and this kind of thing. You are entering a domain that appears to be vastly more capable, vastly more advanced than us. So it seems, and I don't necessarily subscribe to this position, but many get this feeling that DMT is this molecular technology that has been placed somehow, we don't know how or why, this molecular technology that's been placed everywhere. It's everywhere. Terence McKenna's brother, Dennis McKenna, likes to say, nature is drenched in DMT. It really is. You look out your window, you can probably see half a dozen plants that contain DMT. It's ubiquitous. It's by far the most common and ubiquitous, naturally occurring psychedelic. And it also just happens to be the most efficient and reliable reality channel switch that we know of. It's never been improved upon. Nature has provided this simple molecule. And that's also an interesting feature, actually, of DMT. It's an incredibly simple molecule. If you come to my lecture, I'll show you the structure, maybe talk about that a little bit. But
when is your lecture?
My lecture is tomorrow morning, I'm afraid, 8:30. Coffee and nicotine beforehand, and amphetamines. What was I saying? Oh yeah, that's it. Sorry, I lost my track. Yeah, so the structure of the if you're a chemist and you look at DMT, this molecule, say, okay, this is going to be boring. There's nothing interesting about this molecule. It's very closely related to serotonin. But it's even more boring as a chemical structure than serotonin. You take pieces off. You take off an oxygen to get to serotonin. Then you add another couple of groups that basically...
Are you saying you lop off a few bits from serotonin and bingo, you've got DMT?
Basically, yeah. You also have to add a couple of carbons, but they actually neutralize that part of the molecule in a way. So it's as boring a molecule as you could find, basically. And yet, it also happens to be this super efficient and reliable reality channel switch that causes your brain to construct these bizarre hyper-technological realities filled with alien beings. All these little things come together, these little pharmacological and chemical peculiarities of DMT, and you have to start taking notice. This isn't some obscure molecule cooked up in the lab of some clandestine chemist. This is a ubiquitous, very common molecule, plant alkaloid, that is 2 steps from tryptophan. Tryptophan, this amino acid, also the last of the amino acids to evolve. That's a kind of a new structure in reality, this tryptophan amino acid. That's a separate story. Anyway, but yeah, 2 steps from tryptophan, you've got DMT. It's incredibly easy to make. This is not like morphine or the lysergic acids, which are much more complex and much more difficult for a plant to produce. Many more enzymatic steps required. This is super easy for a plant to make, and as a result, many plants, that it's probably quicker to list plants that don't have any DMT than those that do.
So then here's a question. If the DMT intelligence is above a level of complexity above everything else, do you think that they have an ability or interest to manifest results in this world? Did they plant DMT in our plants?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yes or no?
Okay.
The answer starts with a Y.
Yes, that's the answer. What we
How about that in general? Is there, have you seen or in research any instantiations of DMT? So I liken DMT to virtual reality. You, the human analog creature, put on goggles and you feel transported into the digital realm. Augmented reality is the other way around. The digital elements come and overlay in your analog world. So by means of a DMT vape pen, you can feel like this sort of presence of DMT in your waking moments as opposed to being transported to that realm. But if there's this intelligence, and I believe there is, and DMT is like the most widely occurring thing in plants, and all plants do it all the time, it just seems like they left it here for us. And they're almost always inviting when we go there. So it just seems like this is not an accident, that this superintelligence couldn't have been involved with the abundant manifestation of the ticket to the ball.
Right. And so in terms of when people enter the DMT space, there is often a very warm welcome, shall we say. They're often, it feels like a party. People describe like this homecoming. They get this welcome cheer. The elves are dancing and singing. There are lights flashing. Your name might be literally up in lights. This is like, wow, you've come back. We're so excited to see you, and they're showing you things. They're all dancing around you, jumping in and out of your body, and they have these weird objects, impossible objects, 7-dimensional things, crystals or whatever, that they're showing you. Some people describe these like tablet things that have writing on them, and they're just saying, look at this, 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 look at this.
Bring that thing back.
Well, that's a good question, is, you can't bring a 7-dimensional object back yet, but certainly it might be possible to bring back, and people have tried to bring back, with varying success, some of the symbols that they see within the space. So I think that's part of the greater research program is in thinking about how we might bring back information, and that's the key here. I think is to bring back information that can be, say, verified, or the value of which can be assessed.
And I want to go back to a thread that you brought up a little while ago. You mentioned an article that you're working on, or a project you're working on with Rick, and I think I know what it is. You mentioned that all it takes is a glass pipe in 15 minutes, but with DMTX, that is an approach to create sustained experiences with DMT. Can you talk a bit about that? Because that's fascinating for me. And my buddy Andrew and I are the first volunteers for the next wave.
Yes, so DMT is mercifully short. Again, this is another interesting feature of DMT, another one of these pharmacological peculiarities, in that unlike something like psilocybin, another naturally occurring psychedelic, or LSD, which is kind of almost natural, very close to naturally occurring ergoline structures. These last for a long time. You're in there for hours at a time. But at regular doses, and people do heroic doses, which are quite different, but a regular dose of psilocybin mushrooms, for example, is manageable. for most people for those several hours. DMT, less so, I would say, for most people. It is a great blessing, I would say, that it only lasts for, in total 15 minutes.
No, not a blessing at all, man.
So in some, for most people who want to use DMT, don't worry. Trust your wetware, as Gracie and Zarkov used to say. And you're familiar with Gracie and Zarkov. But anyway, trust your own wetware. You will come back. There's no evidence that they can actually harm you in any way. They might pretend that they can. Again, we go back to the idea of, are they telling you the truth? They might pretend, or they might mock you. Some people have kind of quite unpleasant experiences.
I can't imagine a DMT shaming.
Oh yeah. They hyperslap is the word.
Have you been hyperslapped?
I've been hyperslapped. Yes.
Tell us about that in detail.
I don't.
What the hell?
Well, a number of times. So I mean, so I've had beings in like right in my fucking face, screaming at me, some incomprehensible language.
Like a 7-dimensional language.
Exactly. Who obviously some being didn't want me to be there at that particular time. But that was probably an occasion where I wasn't prepared. I maybe just thought, oh, I'll smoke some DMT. I've got, 30 minutes to kill. And so I think if you go in with intent, it's much less likely to happen. I think other times is when you ask questions, the answer of which you're not prepared for. So don't assume that when you ask them a question, what I did is I said, show me what you've got. I really want to see it. Wow. Do your thing, do your worst. I voiced this question.
You got some balls on you, dude.
Yeah, that was the first and last time that I did that. And this being.
Did you really say do your worst?
I didn't say do your worst.
What's wrong with
I said,
you?
Show me what you've got. Show me your thing. I want to see it. I don't want to. I want to see it as the most intense thing that you can offer. And it. The problem is I don't remember the details of that. I wasn't prepared. This being was within this, almost like a cavern, and this being was hooded. He felt like he had a staff, and he was creating reality with the end of his. This doesn't make any sense, right?
That's cool.
But he was stirring a lake of reality itself, which.
It was like bad DMT Gandalf.
Yeah. It made sense. It was obvious that was what he was fucking doing, right? Come on. But now I can't even visualize what that would look like. But it was obvious at the time that's what he was doing. And he turned to me, and he noticed my presence, and I kind of glided over to him, and he had a hood on, as I said. And at that point, I thought, okay, are you going to do anything? And I said to him, show me what you've got. And he came close, like this. His head was kind of just above my head like that. And then all I remember was that he just opened his mouth. That's all he did. He opened his mouth. And all I remember from that point is going... and I snapped out of it and came back into...
Instantly?
Almost instantly. It felt almost instantly.
You got DMT bitch slap, boy.
I got hyper bitch slapped, and I was horrified. I was so shocked by that. I speak about this experience quite a lot.
Have you seen him again?
I've never seen him again. No. It's like seeing. I describe it as like seeing the mouth of God. That's what it felt like, and I wasn't ready to see the mouth of God. So that kind of thing can happen. You have to be prepared. Most of the time, the advice is just go in there, be humble, be respectful. Don't think that you know anything at all, because you really don't. I don't either. Go in there with respect and with positive intent. Reverence is a word that some people use. Go in there with reverence. You are dealing with beings, or could well be dealing with beings that are way, way beyond anything that is within our ability to comprehend. So don't go in there acting like, you know, we do have quite a high opinion of ourselves, I think, as humans. Not without reason, but I think sometimes you have to approach on your knees, I think, with these beings, and with great respect. Living in Japan is good practice for me in that regard, because I always spend half my time bent over. Bowing, I meant bowing. Oh my God.
DMTX.
Sorry. DMTX. Sorry, I lost the track there.
We're asking about DMTX, and you're talking about like the love
On
child
my
of
knees,
Gandalf and Neptune.
yeah, half the time on my knees, the other half, yeah, bent over.
This is getting dark.
DMTX, yes. So, circling back, yeah. So as I said, it's mercifully brief, but the problem with this is that if you really do want to perform more detailed analysis and even mapping, or to establish communication with these beings, we take seriously the idea, which I do, and I know Paul does, that we could well be dealing, we don't know, but we could well be dealing with some kind of other intelligence. That's what it seems to be. It's undeniable for us as individuals, but obviously the jury is out from a scientific perspective. But anyway, if we want to actually perform experiments within the space, that kind of thing, we need to spend more time in there. I treat it as a technology, and part of the reason is that technology is something you develop. You don't assume that when you pluck it, when you pluck DMT from these plants, or you pluck these plants that contain DMT, there's a lot of technology that actually has to go into isolating this molecule. This is not something you can just then munch on these plants and have a DMT trip. This is something that requires something that only humans could actually do. That only humans have the technology to extract and isolate and purify this molecule from this plant. So in a way, DMT is almost like an intelligence test. Have we reached the level where we can isolate this technology and begin to learn how to use it? This is the stage we're at now. But we don't stop there. We don't say, okay, we've discovered the pinnacle of DMT administration technologies, which is a small glass pipe. That would be kind of very surprising. I get some negative reaction sometimes to the idea of injecting DMT. People think this is profane or something. I think quite the opposite. I think we should. It would be disrespectful to assume that we have stumbled upon the perfect means of administering it.
So now you're respectful.
So always. Yeah. Well, yeah, I wasn't
right?
at that time. Yes, but
tell that to Gandalf.
So for me, that's how you respect this technology. You treat it as such, and we bring our best tools to the table, and our best tools are direct intravenous infusion, a continuous infusion of DMT into the bloodstream to maintain a stable brain DMT concentration. Another pharmacological peculiarity of DMT is that it seems to lack significant subjective tolerance. Again, unlike other psychedelics. This is another unique thing about DMT. You can inject someone. Rick Strassman demonstrated this again in the 90s. You inject someone with DMT, you ask them to fill out a rating questionnaire and measure the intensity of the experience. You wait 30 minutes, you inject them again. Again, you measure the intensity of the experience. You do it again 30 minutes later, and the intensity of the experience is the same every time. So there's no subjective tolerance. You try that with LSD. give someone LSD the day after you've given them the day before, and the experience will be much more diminished. You need a much higher dose. Same with magic mushrooms. Same with mescaline. You don't see this tolerance with DMT. So it's almost like DMT has all of these qualities. And this is something I noticed back in 2015 when I put together, I was preparing slides, and I was putting together these unique characteristics of DMT that I thought were kind of interesting. And I realized that these are precisely the pharmacological characteristics that are required for these anesthetic drugs that are used by anesthesiologists in surgery. So if anyone's, I'm sure some of you at least will have been for surgery and been put under a general anesthetic. I know I have in the past. What they do is they don't kind of just inject you with the anesthetic and kind of be done with it, what's called a bolus injection. What they will do is they will put a line into one of your veins, and they will have an infusion machine that they will program to deliver precisely a pharmacokinetically informed based upon this kind of mathematical model of the drug's metabolism, etc. Anyway, they have this programmed infusion of the drug into your bloodstream with the aim being to maintain a brain concentration of the drug within this window to keep you unconscious. And they can push you deeper, if they're making an incision, for example, they can push you deeper into the unconscious state, or they can bring you into a more shallow state. And then eventually, of course, they can bring you back to the waking world. So it occurred to me that we could repurpose this technology, which has been developed in anesthesiology for decades now, is now standard. We can just repurpose this. Instead of using an anesthetic drug, we can use DMT instead. We can build the same mathematical model of DMT's distribution and metabolism and excretion, etc., that they do for anesthetic drugs. So I wrote to Rick Strassman. I said, look, I have this idea about maintaining this stable brain DMT concentration in order to extend the DMT experience from a few minutes to an indefinite period of time. So this could be 30 minutes, it could be 30 hours, if anyone would want to do that. In my workshop, I'll get into what could be months of this kind of experience. But so that's something to look forward to. And so we wrote this paper, which we published in 2016, detailing what's come to be known as DMTX. The X stands for extended. Initially, it was just called extended state DMT. DMTX is catchier. So we presented this, we published it, I spoke about it quite a lot, and some of the articles that you showed there were kind of inspired by that idea. And it's more than an idea now. So there are 3 groups that are implementing DMTX in humans. So we have the Imperial College London team, who have just finished a study with a handful of, a pilot study with a handful of subjects who were kept in the space for 30 minutes. A group in Basel who've done it for 90 minutes. They just published a paper. There's also the original DMTX group out of Boulder, Colorado, led by Daniel McQueen. These are very completely non-academic, so they're kind of closer to my original vision of using this technology to establish communication with these alien intelligences. And they've made huge progress. So they're non-academic, so it's much more difficult for them to make progress because they don't have all of the permits and all of that stuff in place that the universities have. But we're at the stage now where this technology, it works. You can stabilize the DMT state. You can induce somebody into the DMT space and hold them there for at least 30 minutes, at least 90 minutes, and probably much longer. What we found, I hosted a live stream with some of the participants, together with Rick Strassman and Graham Hancock, just a couple of weeks ago, actually. And we interviewed 4 of the participants describing their experiences within the DMT space and the progression through the space over time as this 30-minute infusion progresses. So I think we have respected DMT in that sense, in that we have brought our best tools to the table, that we are trying to develop this, treating it as a technology, and we're starting to see the results of this. And in the future, I think we're going to see many more results. We're going to have many more experiments being performed with people delivering real-time information from the space. And you will have mathematicians and linguists and anthropologists and theologians and artists on the other side waiting, being fed information in real time from the DMT space, which is kind of a remarkable thing, I think.
All-time best muse for an artist. Andrew, you're working on a book now, sort of a history of DMT. Can you talk a little bit about what you're working on?
Yeah, so DMT, DMT goes back a long, long way. Human use of DMT goes back probably thousands of years, and it was only discovered by Western science in the 1950s. So some of you will be familiar with ayahuasca, which is this an oral preparation. So this is a drink, this is a decoction of two plants. One contains the DMT, and the other plant contains what's called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which allows the DMT to be orally active. DMT is not normally orally active. So if you swallow it, nothing will happen unless you have this other molecule, this other type of drug in there. So that in itself is an interesting technology that these indigenous groups in Amazonia discovered, that if you ingest one of the plants on their own, it's not particularly interesting, but when you mix them together, you have this synergistic effect, and there's still great debate and speculation about how they knew. If you ask them, how did you discover ayahuasca, how did you discover how to put these plants together? And they say, well, the spirits told us, the plants told us. Obviously, stupid. But that explanation falls short of an explanation for many people anyway. But yes, so DMT has been used for thousands of years, but it was only discovered by Western science, as I said, in the 1950s. A Hungarian physician called Stephen Zara, who we were lucky to interview before his death. He died at the age of, I think he was almost 100 years old when he died. Albert Hoffman, who discovered LSD, I think was 102 or 103. So if you discover a new psychedelic, you will live a long time. Yes, or if you do a lot of psychedelics as well, hopefully you will live a long time as well. So Stephen Zara, there was kind of a debate at the time about the components of this plant snuff called jojoba. And some scientists, there's basically two molecules, two naturally occurring chemicals in this snuff. So this snuff is kind of crazy shit, man. It's the seeds that are roasted and ground up to the very, very fine powder. And then the powder is kind of laid out in a long tube. It's like
a yard long.
It's a yard long, yes, a meter, more than a meter, slightly less than a meter, but a long tube basically. And you get on one end, and you place the tube up your nostril, and then the guy on the other end, blows forcefully. Explosively. So this powder, and there can be up to a teaspoon. This is not a small amount. This is a fucking big line, man. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've done some lines in my time, but this takes the biscuit, right? I'm joking. I've never done any lines. But yeah, imagine a teaspoon of this powder and it burns. It's very unpleasant being forced. It's like a shotgun into your nostril, and there's your mucus and blood and streaming out. Your eyes start watering.
Sounds awesome.
Yes, sounds awesome. It's a hell of a party. And then you have these visions, and you start to speak to these spirits, these gods, as they call them. So we've known, and the same with ayahuasca. That's why they drink ayahuasca, is to communicate with these beings that you can't see. So we knew that these drugs, these plants, decoctions, or these plant preparations were allowing them to speak with some kind of other intelligence, but we weren't aware of the nature, what the chemical was.
So, yeah, I mean, you can be healthily skeptical that some alien intelligence is telling us how to use these substances which are in abundance here, but at some point it gets a little bit hard to believe also that these tribes figure out which two things to combine to have ayahuasca. I mean, who is it? Who's the shaman who's trying all these different permutations? And then how do they decide, well, this other thing here isn't really bioactively available unless you make it a meter long and blow it up somebody's nose, right? How many other permutations would they have had to do to get to that one, right? That starts to sort of beggar disbelief.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I guess they had to work up. I mean, yeah, it's true. I mean, if you snort, if you for some reason decided to snort, I mean, that in itself, why did they decide to do that? The seeds of this plant, you probably wouldn't have any effect. So most people would give up at that point. They wouldn't go, well, let's up it to a teaspoon.
Sounds like they may not all have been volunteers, is sort of the image I'm getting here.
Perhaps. But yeah, the history itself is fascinating. But when we get into the 1950s and Stephen Zara started to think about, what's the chemical composition of this? And there was two components, as I said. One's called bufotenine, named after the frog skin secretion. Not the same as 5-MeO-DMT, by the way. That's separate. So bufotenine isn't particularly, in my opinion, some people disagree with me, that's fine, but isn't particularly psychoactive. And in the 1940s, I think it was, they isolated bufotenine. That was the first chemical they isolated from this jojoba snuff, the one that you blow into the nostrils. And in kind of classic 1940s medical style, they injected kind of rather large quantities into a group of Ohio State Penitentiary inmates. That was
not always volunteers.
Exactly. And they went purple, their blood pressure went through the roof, they started sweating, convulsing and vomiting, and this wasn't it, clearly, right? This wasn't a kind of this means of communion with the gods. So Stephen Zara, read these results and thought, nah, that can't be it. That's not what they're using. That's not the active component here. So he looked at the other one, the other molecule, which was N,N-dimethyltryptamine, DMT, and he synthesized it. In his lab. He's got a PhD in organic chemistry as well as being a physician. He synthesizes DMT and he starts swallowing it. He started off low dose.
He didn't live near a prison?
No, he didn't live near a prison. So, well, he had a cat though, but I won't get into that for those of sensitive disposition. But we'll forget about the cat. So he tried it on himself after the cat. And he just started swallowing it, and he started, a very small amount. I mean, he knew about Albert Hoffman's story, you see, where Albert Hoffman thought, the smallest dose I can measure is like, a quarter of a milligram. That's, turned out that was a massive dose of LSD, or certainly substantial dose for a first time. Zara was very cognizant of that. So he started very low, but nothing happened. He went up and up, and he got to the point where he was swallowing like more than a gram of this DMT, pure DMT. And a normal dose, by the way, is about 30 milligrams. So he was an order of magnitude, 20 times or whatever above what would be a normal dose, but nothing happened. He had no effect. Now we know now, of course, that DMT is not orally active. We didn't know this at the time. So he was ready to give up, actually, on DMT, and we would have, it would have been a long time before we actually kind of rediscovered it. But his colleague says, hey, maybe you should try injecting it. So he intramuscularly injected himself with like 50 milligrams of DMT, and that was kind of the world's first pure DMT trip was had by this Hungarian physician. He describes, it's remarkable really, when we're all used to now, if you go on online forums or you listen to Terence McKenna, you see these, you can read these remarkable trip reports. But what I like to do is go back pre-McKenna, pre-Erowid, pre-internet, pre all of that, right back to the very first studies of DMT use in humans, which was Stephen Zara and his subsequent volunteers, who were basically doctors and nurses from the hospital where he worked. And even in these very, very first studies, people start describing these rapidly changing procession of highly complex geometric imagery and seeing beings. We get reports of perhaps in the parlance of the time, we get reports of spirits, we get reports of people seeing gods, not just other beings, not humans. Humans are very rare in the DMT state, and that in itself is kind of odd. Humans are by far the most commonly experienced other intelligence in our life. That's what our brain is very used to, building representations of humans. You rarely see humans in the DMT state. And people have measured this, actually. It's like less than 10%. Other non-human intelligences is the rest. So already we're starting to see the characteristic motifs. This is before the McKenna effect, before people were listening to McKenna. People were describing seeing little beings as well that were moving around very quickly. These sound like elves to me. These sound like the reports that of the machine elves that McKenna would name and make famous later on. So right from the beginning, right from the very first study in humans back in 1956, I think it was, we start to see these intelligences within the space.
Okay, so we've got about 10 more minutes. I'm going to allow some time for questions here. But first, going to circle back here, Mr. Academic. Are DMT
Dr.
machine
Academic.
elves... Yeah, Dr. Academic, Mr. Sir, Liege Lord. Are DMT machine elves aliens?
Yes.
Okay, time for questions. There we go. There you go. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Yes, the sassy-looking gentleman in the black.
Fantastic talk. Two-part question. First is, does DMT change the brain? So we know that psilocybin has physiologic, neurologic changes in the brain chemistry. Does DMT do the same? And then second part...
That sounded like a voice of God answering the question there. It was
Do you
really
like that? Second part is you talk about breakthrough. And is that just an intensity thing where you just have enough and it's just a more intense experience? Or are there different levels to the experience in your experience?
So yes, DMT does change the brain. So in the sense that it changes it acutely, obviously it changes neural activity, changes the structure of your world, but also it also promotes synaptic plasticity. It's synaptogenic in the same way that psilocybin is. So it promotes the growth of new neurons, it promotes the proliferation of what's called dendritic arborization. There's a technical term for you. So the more connections can be formed in the brain in the same way that psilocybin does, and LSD as well. So that the classic psychedelics seem to share that property, which is why they could be extremely useful for things like stroke rehabilitation, and also where you want to change the brain. You want to change the wiring in a way, with the depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder, that kind of thing.
Are there people that have used DMT as a medicine like that to sort of address an issue they have in themselves as opposed to exploring in that world?
Yes, absolutely. Many people do. Many people in terms of like medical establishments, we're not quite there yet. It will be explored more with this DMTX technology because it's so fast. It's hard to do work within the space, either on yourself or on others. But it's much easier with something like psilocybin or LSD. But certainly, yes, people do go in there with an intent of learning something about themselves or something that's bothering them. They might be a traumatic memory. It might just be the way that they view their life and their world, and so self-therapy is certainly something that people use DMT for. Regarding the breakthrough experience, there seems to be a threshold in that there seems to be a transition. It's like a phase transition. The initial phase is this highly complex geometric imagery, a sense of propulsion, like you're hurtling through this rapidly changing procession of imagery. And then, normally, if you don't take enough, that's as far as you go.
Like vivid colors.
Yeah, extremely vivid colors that don't exist in the normal world. And if you take enough, then you seem to people describe as like breaking through a veil. They see the veil. Terence McKenna used to call it the chrysanthemum. You seem to burst through, and once you burst through, then you're in this alternate reality, and this is where you will meet the beings, and you can explore this entirely new world.
The lake-making wizard.
Yes, he was on the other side.
Other questions? Yeah.
I can't see anyone, so I don't know who's got the hand up.
I haven't learned very much about it, but I understand that some people are trying to map their experiences, combine their experiences with others, and map the environment in there. Is that true?
Yes. So mapping is well, what do we mean by a map? I'm not talking like an
Topographical?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. So, and there's a number of ways we can map. You can map the levels of the experience, do different levels, different dose levels, brain levels of DMT, reliably take you to different places.
Or like maybe overlapping sort of reports of things that are there that are sort of corroborative?
Yes. So that's something which we're very interested in, is do people reliably, what are the kind of beings that people report? Because people come back and say, I saw the machine elves, or I saw this Joker kind of character, or I saw this guardian spirit, or whatever. People often describe, and there is some attempt at forming some kind of hyperspatial lexicon.
So if there is this topographical map being generated, can we buy land there?
Not yet, but I'm working on it, yes.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am?
Ties in with that. When you're choosing people for studies and things like that, are people looking at using people like who are shamans, who have experiences in, travailing alternate realities consciously? They would have more experience in knowing how to map, knowing certain protocols, and then also being able to recall it once they're back into normal waking reality.
Yes. So with the Imperial study, all of the subjects were experienced DMT users. They were very, obviously, with this kind of study, you don't want someone who's what you would call DMT naive, i.e. someone who'd never taken DMT before. You don't want to hook them up for 30 minutes. But you're absolutely right. It requires an extensive period of training. It's like learning to fly a very fast aircraft. You don't just put somebody into a stealth bomber and say, okay, off you go. There's a lot of training, and there are certain people that are more suited to it than others. I wouldn't be particularly suited for it, I don't think. But other people are. They can manage the space. They can learn to navigate and keep their cool within the space and orient themselves, and not lose themselves to astonishment and being completely startled and shaken and disoriented in the space. So certainly, yes, absolutely. We use always experienced journeyers, so to speak.
I think we got time for one more question. Isaac, did you have a question? You can just shout it out, dude.
Okay. So in physics, In physics, we learned that through the observer effect, no experimenter can be separate from their experiment, meaning there is no real control. We're all quantumly entangled with the experiment we're experimenting on. So I'm just curious, has your work delved into the differences in the experiences of the patients, the volunteers, in reference to their level of consciousness? For example, if you have someone who's schizophrenic, or they see things and they're in a poor, low vibrational state of consciousness, they will see demons. But if that same type of person is able to entrain their mind to a higher vibration, they'll be communicating with angels. So have you considered that in your work?
It's certainly worthy of consideration. We're at the stage at the moment, or these teams that are using DMTX, of really just pilot studies, so testing. Is it tolerable? Does it work? From there, this is where these other kind of experiments start to take place. You have ethical considerations, of course, if you... Unfortunately, people with schizophrenia will probably be excluded from these kind of studies, as they are generally from studies with psychedelics. But in the past, certainly, if you look at historical studies, people with schizophrenia have been given DMT, but I don't think anyone's really tried to quantify the specific differences in the kind of beings and how you might access different kinds of beings. I mean, this is a whole new world that we're entering here.
Get busy.
Yeah.
Is that essentially, if you can have someone with an extremely high level of consciousness, they would be more effective to go into that realm and bring things back, theoretically speaking. So.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that.
All right, I think our time is just about up. We've had a session today with the world's foremost psychedelic speculator, who I think has left us all more, how did you say, pharmacokinetically informed. Please put your hands together and give a warm round of applause for Dr. Andrew Gallimore. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you very much for listening to me rant and ramble for... It felt like 30 minutes, but apparently we've been in here quite a while, so thank you.